Hi guys, my name is Borodante, and welcome back to the First Witness horror game character development, texturing in particular. So, we're not in Blender anymore, and yeah, the overwhelming amount of comments under the previous video where I tried to make everything work in Blender, you guys just kept repeating like, try Substance, try Substance, try Substance. And like, I heard about Substance, I saw it a little bit, never really felt like it's enough to actually, split my process into two separate apps. Before that, everything was just in Blender, which is much easier. I hate exporting the model to one app, then bringing it back into Blender for something else. It's always a bunch of problems, things look different ways or whatever, scale issues or something. But there's a bunch of reasons why this is not a problem here, and also why this investment is actually a pretty decent deal in terms of just spending money when you could just not spend at all. And yeah, a certain fundamentally improved feature that made me immediately consider getting Substance. So let's talk about all of that, starting with how I made sure that the texture on the shirt in front actually wraps around and follows the edge of the shirt properly. Spoiler alert, I didn't do that in Substance, I did it in Photoshop. And yeah, then I'll show you what's so awesome about Substance and just a few cool tricks that you can do here, and some of that you could actually do in Blender as well. So let's compare those things and talk about the whole experience. Now, this video has a sponsor, Wingfox, and they have this new character illustration course, the basics of game character design process. Now, my favorite thing about this course is that it's focused on working with the design and working with color theory for the characters and what actually makes a character unique and special. But of course, generally the whole process is made in this very specific, well-polished, like not always necessarily anime, but definitely like Eastern design. And yeah, your lecturer Nessie, who's a very experienced freelance illustrator, she has this amazing skill level, so it's very interesting to know what she has to share about what she learned while working with a whole lot of different awesome games. The course is made of two parts. The first one is the theory part, where all this interesting information is discussed and illustrated. And the second part will be the real-life example about creating a character from sketch to the final design. So if any of you guys are interested, the course is available right now for only $45 because it's in the early birds fundraising stage. So we're fundraising the translation of this course to English, so it will start releasing in 60 days, but right now is a good time to invest into it, so you will get the access to the full course when it starts coming out. As always, the link to the course is in the video description. Now back to our texturing of the horror character. So I had this big problem, right? If we'll switch to this two-dimensional mode, try not to pay attention to this. This is just, this is a live texturing process. I'll talk about all of these horrible wounds in a moment. But the thing I had a lot of problems with in the previous video, just to recap real quick, it was about this little piece of the shirt and this little piece of the shirt. So they're both these two frontal pieces, this one and this one. And as I showed in the previous video, the problem was if you just use the UVs as I created them, because of how I created the model with the amount of surface at the bottom and at the top, it ended up being aligned perfectly at the bottom, but then being at 45 degrees at the top, or vice versa, depending on where you want to choose it. But you had to somehow curve the texture along this little piece of clothing to make it work. And so this is exactly how I made it work right here, and this is something that you guys were recommending in the comments as well, so thank you guys for that. And we can see it right here. So this is the two pieces. I created like a mask for one and the other right there, and inside of it I applied this piece of cloth. This is a smart object, so any kind of transformations I made, including scaling and everything to make it fit with the the rest of the clothing so it would look the same. I just saved like 2 rectangles of this texture in a little bit more than 2 apparently, in a smart object like this. And in here, I applied a bunch of color correction things and all of that. But the most interesting thing is how I made sure it's stretched like that. You can see it's not perfect, and you can see this a bit of an awkward angle in here going on as well. I can still fix that, and I think I'll probably do that. I can apply a little bit of Liquify to it to make it a bit cleaner. But the main adaptation of the whole curvature was done using this thing. And this is one of my favorite things in Photoshop. It's favorite because it's unique to Photoshop. I don't think there's a lot of apps out there that have this particular kind of transformation available. So if I'll turn on the grid, this is the whole texture before it's masked out. So this is what it looks like. And you pretty much, this mode of transformation is right here, it's Puppet Warp. And you can see it keeps being live, I think because it's on the smart object. Everything you apply to a smart object, you can then reopen the document and, you know, add some extra changes and everything. So there are a few points modes, normal points modes, and more points mode. And you can see it gets all freaked out when I redo it, so I'll cancel that. So you choose the mode of more points and then you start working. So pretty much you add a point and you can just move that point around. This is really cool, super advanced kind of thing. And that's exactly what made the whole thing work. It's not super perfect because everywhere I add a point, it kind of slightly pinches, like it creates like a pinch, like a sharper thing. And also the amount of these like triangles is not big enough, like even with more points mode. It's kind of rare polygons, so in here I get this very polygonated look that translates into this polygonated look in here. But that's a tiny detail that after this I can sort of duplicate the layer, turn it into a simple flat layer, not a smart object, with applied transformation, and then use Liquify to smooth it out a little bit. But generally this first transformation is really awesome to do like this. I'll reset it. So before anything's applied, if you use 1 point, it just drags the whole thing around. If you use 2 points, you get to transform them like this, but then you add the 3rd point, and yeah, you can also like stretch, but you can see it's not the perfect thing to use for stretching. But then if you use the 3rd point, this is where you can create this cool, almost skeletal animation bending. And this is pretty much what we needed. The only thing is, instead of using the points in the middle, I use them on the edges to make sure there's minimum of those pinching moments. So you kind of pinch like this and drag, and you just align that like if we have that this button right here that creates this stretch and changes in direction. So you use it like this, then you pinch the opposite sides a little bit, you know, and adjust the thing to the shape of your curvature. So instead of going straight, it bends like this. That's pretty much the thing. I found that this seems to be like the best way to work with this situation where you already have, you know, all the UVs ready and everything's set in stone a little bit. And it's just this one little thing you want to make sure it works. Like, how do you do it? Well, in Photoshop specifically, Puppet Warp seems to work really awesome. So yeah, that's what I did before I decided to look into Substance. And one thing that made me look into Substance, I just started watching videos of process on YouTube of some people using Substance Painter. And one thing that made me super excited about it, that immediately I decided that, okay, this is worth looking into, like what are the prices and such. It was about the thing that you're witnessing right now. This is something that's not available in Blender texturing at all. And I'm talking about the fact that the brush is aligned to the normal of the surface. So it's curving, like tilting with the surface like this in 3 dimensions. And that alone pretty much means that we no longer project our brush strokes from the screen, but instead we project them onto the surface. So as I showed in the previous video, when I was trying to paint the nose, it made that thing where it cast like a shadow onto a cheek, and the cheek was also painted with like an outline of the nose, which is like, how do you work with that at all? And the thing is, I didn't expect any program to have it working differently, because a long time ago I tried the program called Mari, which is a very professional, very powerful program for texturing in super ultra high resolutions, like 100K resolutions and all that. And Mari totally worked like that, just projecting from the screen, creating those shadows and everything. It was exactly the same way, and I thought, well, I guess if that app does it that way, I guess it's just not here yet, the technology for projecting textures in more of an advanced way. And of course, we've seen proper projection in like ZBrush when you texturize things or something like that, or like in vertex painting in Blender. But that's vertex painting. If you want to actually paint on pixels instead of separate vertices, you have to work with texture painting, and that's where things just don't work. Another app I tried was Quixel Mixer, which is a free option from Epic Games, but it's a very new app for texturing. It doesn't have a lot of features, even though it has a really cool interface, very clean and simple to understand. It has very few features yet. It's not very polished, and it only has this projection from the screen, no projection from a normal. But in here, right now, comparing to the video in Blender where I had the shadow on the cheek, in here, in the same situation, if I paint on the nose, ignoring the fact of how disgusting it is, you can see no shadow or anything, because it's just projecting onto the surface from here, not from the camera like this. It just lands perfectly onto it. And aside from this, Substance actually has a bunch of other modes for your projections. So this is pretty much the same. This is settings for the brush. And in here, it's called Tangent Wrap, but we also have camera. And in camera mode, you can see it's like the brush is not tilting anymore. Yet still, it's somehow masking on the surface. It still won't just go ahead and, you know, shoot the paint throughout the whole universe. So things are a lot more advanced. They don't work in the way that is completely useless to have, you know? And this is some other mode as well. Like there's a bunch of different ways, like planar and wrap. I guess it's about the way the texture will be landing like this, or landing sort of like this. So less stretching if you use wrap, so I would recommend using wrap usually. And yeah, there's also this UV mode, which pretty much means you will only be following one UV aisle. I believe, like right here, right? We'll see this thing. We can see the seam going on. That's because I have the face divided into separate pieces, like this is the neck. And this is where I was painting, so pretty much I was painting like this. It looks bad right now, but in some cases it will be very useful if you have specific, correctly placed islands that separate certain things that should be different, you know? So that's also a useful mode, and it's really cool to have all these awesome advanced modes for how your brushstrokes land on the surface. This is what at all makes painting on the 3D surface possible. Like really useful, usable, and like really good. I know, I'm super excited about this. This is like the only app I know that actually makes this happen. So this alone, I think, makes Substance Painter a really awesome deal and worth purchasing. Like this is an awesome app. And yeah, about purchasing, as you can see, it's Adobe Substance 3D Painter right now. If you guys don't know a lot about Substance, it used to be its own Substance thing from a separate company, but then recently Adobe bought it, and now it's like a subscription with a bundle of separate 3D apps. They're all Substance 3D things. And yeah, that subscription is like $20 per month. So in a year, you would pay $240 for the minimal subscription of 3 apps together, which is Substance Designer, Substance Painter, and Substance, I don't know, the third app to like pose and render a model. Actually, the third app is called Sampler, and it's a small app that turns photos into textures or brushes. The subscription with that Stager app is actually $50 a month. So you get to only subscribe to those 3 apps together, and you pay $240 each year. But I didn't do that, because what I found out is that Adobe actually sells these 3 apps separately from each other with a perpetual forever license. You pay once for like this app And in my version of Steam, meaning like Ukrainian version of Steam, it costs $60. Probably with Adobe it costs the same everywhere. So I paid $60 for Adobe Substance Painter 2022. And so by the end of this year, they'll stop updating it. And then they'll release 2023 version, I assume. And then if you want updates, you would have to pay another $60 to get the next version. But that's $60 a year instead of $220. Or even if you would want Substance Painter and Substance Designer, which is a reasonable thing to want because Substance Designer is very advanced texture and material creating node-based software. It's really cool. That app would also cost $60, so that's $120 per year instead of $240 for 3 apps, one of which you definitely don't need. It's a much better option. Like, there's no reason to get a subscription from Adobe as far as I'm concerned. Maybe there's some extra benefits if you're subscribed, but I don't really care about those. What I care about is having Substance Painter, and I just got it forever for $60. Though I do have to constantly have Steam launched together with this app, or maybe, yep, just checked, you do have to have Steam always on in your tray over there. I mean, I'll take it. And yeah, so aside from having this amazing engine for projecting textures and having a weird problem with the pixel density of my display, having everything too big, like there's no way to improve this. I can make it too small, or I can make it normal, but everything will be at half resolution, so everything will be fuzzy, including the viewport. So it's a weird thing. I decided to just keep it like this for the video, at least, to have text bigger than I need instead of smaller than you guys will be able to see. I think I'll mostly be using it like at too tiny of a mode, but even for that you have to like switch the scale of Windows to a smaller one before you launch it. A weird bug that they know about, they are working on it. It's a weird thing. I'm not sure they're gonna resolve it soon. But yeah, as you can see right here, I don't know what to do. Everything's so huge. Okay, like that. So I have a pretty complex set of layers in here, and what it does is I have the bottom set of textures, which is what I brought from Blender. So this is just all the textures we had that made sure the proper roughness and metallicness and everything is applied. Then I add a little concrete dusty texture on top of the shirt specifically to have this kind of bumpy thing going on. I mean, it's just a test. And finally we have this. This is something very interesting I was working with today, and yeah, and this is this gross horror of wounds going on all over the skin. So as you can see, you have a whole bunch of things. Let me just quickly go through it. At first, you have just this black and white mask right here that's called like metal edge wear, and you can well, adjust it a lot to, this is traumatizing, I know, but like you can choose different kinds of mess that can be going on the surface, and Substance has a few of pretty smart things that work with like the edges, the curvature of the surface and everything. And it works pretty fast for what it is. You can also implement all the normal maps and bumpy little details to work as well, even when they're just in a texture. But yeah, like choose your poison here and make sure it works generally. And what's cool, each layer, each color that you add, it's always not just a color, but all the channels can be affected. So in this case, we choose like the color of our blood or meat. And also we choose if it's metallic or not. We also choose how like rough or shiny it is. So all that stuff. But what was really interesting to me is that you can actually just create a paint layer and you can change these settings immediately for each stroke of your brush. So I'll make a stroke with this white, somewhat glossy material. Then I'll choose like some kind of blue-green color, and I'll make it very reflective, and I'll paint in the same layer, so I'm changing the properties of the surface inside of the same layer. It's kind of cool. That's not something I expected to be able to do. Because there are a lot of alternative ways like that in Blender to work with in the similar fashion when you can paint with a certain material, you know? But not like when you can just use one layer for all of that, you know? And yeah, you can use all kinds of textures and jittering and all like, there's so many things in here. Oh yeah, like that. But mostly what's fun is working with layers. So at first, what we actually have going on is just this texture. That's like a mask applied to our material that we could just paint into this mask right here. And this is what this material looks without any masking. But then if we use this dripping rusty whatever mask, it kind of looks like this. Then I added a paint layer on top so I could actually, you know, add details if I want to, but I'll add that later. Then what I do is I blur that mask, then I add more dirt on top with overlay mode, and then I sort of burn that out or in or whatever you want to say, and that's how you get the complex edge. That's like the basic thing about working with blur, combining two textures and then increasing contrast or squeezing the levels to make this kind of look. So you remove the dirt, you introduce the dirt back, and that's what it looks like. And if you just change the dirt like scale, grunge scale, you can see how you're really making the edges very complex. And finally, I add this little thing, but I won't get into it. That's very technical. I looked through a set of 4 short videos from Adobe about using anchor points, which is a super awesome thing. If you guys are interested, I'll leave a link to those videos in the description. Super short, like less than half an hour of videos that cover a lot of things. Generally, if you're advanced, you can easily start using Substance immediately after those videos. But yeah, in this paint layer, I can paint, and you can see this is a simple smooth brush, but it has this complex edge because of all this extra dirt applied on top. So this is a cool little trick, but generally I can see it's very matte for some reason. Did I at some point make it matte? Yeah, it's super rough. So yeah, we should probably go with something like that. And yeah, you can control what this meat looks like inside as well by changing like the height map. There's so many things, like I'm not trying to cover all of it, of course, but generally I'm just trying to show you how complex of a thing you can make. But what's really cool, after that, using those anchor points and everything, you add, like I added inflammation layer, so that just works with the skin around the wounds. And it doesn't just make them red and glossy, you can see there's like more gloss and redness going on, but also it creates like bump around the wounds, so there's like a little bit of inflammation that makes it stick out. You can see it really well like this, so it's like bumpy. And it's really cool how you set all of this up, and then you go back into this layer at the bottom, and you can just paint more of these wounds that create all of these bumps and everything all at the same time, and redness and glossiness. So it's really cool to have all of this in real time. Again, I had very similar experience with this kind of effects in PBR Painter add-on in Blender. But the problem is Blender doesn't really have good blurring effects, so things are pretty limited in there. You can't do too much of all of this. And many other effects are absent in there as well, so this is much more advanced and much higher performance. With this amount of layers and effects in Blender with the add-on, it would be so slow by now. Like, it's slow here, but it's usable, you know? You can quickly turn off a bunch of stuff to make things faster, but you can even still work like this. But anyway, after all of this, I have another layer that blurs details underneath. That's how I made the surface of this meat a bit softer instead of being so sharp. And yeah, apparently I painted into it somewhere. Let me quickly get rid of that. But yeah, this blurring of normals is definitely something you can't add in Blender just like that. So it's really cool. Now, if you go back into this painting mode at the bottom, and if I add all of this, you can see how this is just a whole bunch of this gross, looks like some disgusting beans or something. Like, it's not the best, obviously. I didn't want to waste too much time looking for the perfect texture for the meat. But yeah, the point is, with this setup that I created in like half an hour, I think it can go even faster if you're doing it not for the first time. You can create all of this and, you know, and then just get on with working on your character and doing something for your horror game. That would be really cool. That's definitely not going in the game, but yeah, all of this advanced material work together with this projection from the normals, it just immediately solved so many issues that I had with texturing in Blender. And by the way, this right here, this different material like of dirt that's kind of has different glossiness from the shoe, and it's covering things here as well, like combining normals and everything. This was actually done in Blender using PBR Painter, so it's pretty much the same workflow of combining different things, different material passes and everything, material channels, and, you know, just making brush strokes that make it look like a believable kind of thing. Although it became a lot more matte when I exported it to Substance, so there are issues with different apps interpreting things differently, I guess. But yeah, definitely happy with my purchase. I'll keep working here. And what's really cool about the whole thing of using, you know, separate apps to work on one model, we're not really working on the model here, which is the fun part. We're only working on the textures. After this, I'll just hit like export textures, and then I'll just update them in a Blender file, and that's it. I don't import the meshes back. It's only the textures. This app is just for working on the textures. So it's absolutely pain-free in that regard. You know, I already got a little add-on for Blender that sends this whole mesh immediately to Substance with a press of a button. And then I just get textures back into Blender and that's it. So it's pretty painless and, you know, really worth it in terms of having a lot of freedom and power of working with the textures. So I guess that's what I have to say about Substance Painter. Since so many of you guys really wanted me to give it a try, there you have it. Now I'm gonna be using it. But yeah, let me know what you guys think about all of this. I really wanted to keep using Blender, and for a quick little object, you know, simple texturing of a simple thing, I'll definitely be more than happy to just, you know, never leave Blender and just quickly use PBR Painter to create some kind of cool textures right in Blender. But if it requires actual like hand painting of textures on the scan, you know, or stuff like that, I'll definitely send things to Substance because that's where you can actually paint on the surface like, well. But yeah, for now this is it. Thank you guys for watching and I'll see you in the next video. Bye! I'm gonna save this folder, but I don't think I'm gonna be using it a lot. It's a bit too much.